Hello, everyone. My name is René Salgado, and I serve as the president of the EmpreSomos Central America initiative. Our mission is to foster entrepreneurial development throughout the Central American region. To learn more about our work, please visit us at empresomos.org. I am delighted to welcome you to today's session titled University Entrepreneurial Ecosystems, Funding, Collaboration, and Acceleration for Regional Innovation. This session is part of our program EmpreSomos Central America Entrepreneurial Connectivity, which we proudly implement in partnership with CLACSIN, CAE, and CAMTIC. We are thrilled to have an esteemed panel joining us for this webcast, and we look forward to an engaging discussion on this critical topic. The webcast will feature the following participants: Mr. Will Charles from UniServices of the University of Auckland, New Zealand; Dr. Arturo Condo, Earth University, Costa Rica; Professor Alejandra Alquijay, Universidad del Valle, Guatemala; Dr. Marco Tulio Canales, Universidad Tecnológica Centroamericana of Honduras; and Dr. Antje Fiedler from the University of Auckland, New Zealand, who teaches entrepreneurship and innovation at the university. The webcast structure is going to be the following. We're going to have the introduction from each participant, who will briefly talk about their work. Then it's going to be the presentation by Mr. Charles, who will deliver the main topics of the event and the discussion. Then we will have the panel discussion. This will include questions, comments, and exchanges with all the participants. We look forward to an engaging and insightful discussion. Please welcome everyone. Who would like to start the introduction? Should we start with the ladies? Okay. Let's go to Central America first. What about Professor Alquijay?
Thank you, Renee. And hello, everyone. My name is Maria Alejandra Alquijay. I am a dean, professor, and mentor at Universidad del Valle de Guatemala. Over the years, I have been privileged to guide aspiring and established entrepreneurs, helping them transform their innovative ideas into thriving businesses. I find immense joy in watching entrepreneurs I've worked with achieving their milestones, whether it's like launching their first product, making their first sale, scaling their businesses, or changing lives in their communities. Apart from my academic endeavors, I've been a consultant and board member of the Food and Beverages Commission of the Guatemalan Exporters Association. I love working at the intersection of education, collaboration, and action, building bridges between universities, industries, and communities to cultivate thriving innovation ecosystems. Throughout my career, I've seen how the right funding, partnerships, and acceleration programs can be the catalysts that drive regional innovation. I deeply believe that universities are not just places of learning, but vibrant hubs of innovation that can ignite economic and social progress. It's this belief that fuels my passion for sharing knowledge, fostering a collaboration, and inspiring entrepreneurial leaders to take bold steps forward. At Universidad del Valle de Guatemala, we have a Center for Entrepreneurship dedicated to inspire, train, and empower aspiring entrepreneurs to transform their ideas into startups and then into thriving businesses. UVG is also a key part of Proyecto Aspire, which is a 5-year, $15 million project funded by USAID and implemented by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the Universidad del Valle de Guatemala, and the Guatemalan Exporters Association. This partnership brings together new methods of expansion for the innovation, research, and entrepreneurship capacities of higher education institutions in Latin America. UVG is also part of Red Emprende, which is a four-institution initiative funded by the European Union to help promote entrepreneurship and improve access to formal employment for youth and women in Sololá. Through a strong collaboration between academia, like civil society, the business sector, and government, we aim to strengthen the entrepreneurial ecosystem and enhance the quality of life of indigenous communities. To me, it's like entrepreneurship is more than a profession. It's a way to drive innovation, create opportunities, and solve challenges. And there's nothing more fulfilling than being part of that journey, like side by side with those who dare to dream and to do. So I look forward to exchanging ideas and exploring how we can collectively create ecosystems that not only launch businesses, but transform regions into global centers of innovation. Thank you, Rene.
Great. No, thanks to you. This is a very nice introduction. What about Antje? Do you want to go next, Antje?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Renee, and hello, everyone. My name is Antje Fiedler. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Auckland in the Department of Management and International Business. My passion is about, understanding Asia and how firms can strive in Asia and how knowledge spills over from the West. So I'm also the deputy director of the New Zealand Asia Institute. Like Maria, I work a lot with small firms and entrepreneurs, so I have a strong practitioner engagement. I've delivered workshops all around New Zealand on topics such as doing business in Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, but also how to manage partnerships on IP protection in Asia. My research really focuses on knowledge spillover, entrepreneurial ecosystems, but also more increasingly on sustainability, because I believe that entrepreneurship can be a catalyst to move a society towards a more sustainable world. So that is my passion, and I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Renee.
Absolutely. You are most welcome. What about, should we go to Honduras, Dr. Condo, or should we go to Costa Rica? Here we have Dr. Marco Canales. Go ahead.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here with you. First place, thank you I wanted to thank you for the invitation. My name is Marco Canales. I'm the Dean of Engineering here at the Universidad Tecnológica Central Americana, or UNITEC for short. We here at UNITEC, my career started back in 2008 as a professor and researcher. I moved into the administrative part in 2019. First as head of department of civil engineering. I'm a civil engineer by trade, and I moved into the dean position in 2022. UNITEC is very committed towards nurturing the entrepreneurship ecosystem here in Honduras, and we're constantly trying to see and pursue initiatives that will be able to put our talent in contact with the opportunities that can lead to growth. We have several initiatives that are coming into play with different parts of the university, from our hub de emprendimiento, is what we call it here in the Universidad, which is an entrepreneurship hub, as well as our UNITEC Fab Lab, which would be the innovation side from the perspective of pure engineering. And I'm very interested to be able to get to know more about UniServices, because I was looking into it and have some very interesting concepts and things that I think would be able to grant identity and belonging to the young talent, and to be able to turn all these possibilities into reality. So I'm glad to be here.
Great. Thank you very much, Marco Tulio. Then we go to Dr. Condo.
Well, thanks so much for the invitation, Renee. It's a pleasure to see you again, and a pleasure to be in this great company. I think we're all aligned. We strongly believe in the entrepreneurial spirit of our students. Our students come from all across Latin America and Africa. About 20% of our students are African, and so it's a very interesting mix. A very successful one, just as my colleagues have mentioned. About 25% of our graduates start their own business, and that's a good number for Latin America and Africa. And it's inspiring to see them, trying to do things that sometimes are not, that definitely are not easy to do in our different contexts. I do think there is much more to be done at universities. So this is clearly a biased sample of people who are already completely committed to this, but more needs to be done. And as it was mentioned, I think there's a lot of innovation in our young people for sure, when given the right tools. I was for 20 years at Arturo Business School before Earth, and now for 8 years now at Earth University, and we can do more, as I said, but they have so few so few mental constraints. And so young people can imagine things that sometimes other people cannot. And I think if we manage to make it feasible, not only with money, which is necessary, financial resources are important, but also with the exploration. And in my own experience and in the incredible work that Earth has done for now 34 years, focusing on a set of problems is very helpful, because, so it's not just, why don't you start a company, but rather, how do you solve this, right? How do you solve for these issues? In our case, of course, food systems, and within food systems, there are so many things to do, because it has to do with primary production, but also with processing, with distribution, with waste control, and many things. And so when they focus on problems, it's, their innovation juices start to flow. And so we'll talk more, but it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Condo. This is very kind of you. And should we move forward then with Will's introduction first, and then his presentation? Go ahead, Will.
Sure. I feel very privileged to be here, and in fact, I have somewhat of an imposter syndrome, given that I'm talking to some people who've got lots of experience and way deeper knowledge in a lot of these things than I do. Just my background: I was I worked in corporate sales and marketing, and then general management roles in the pharmaceutical industry and biotechnology industry for about 20 years, most latterly in South Korea, where I ran a business unit for Novartis. I returned to New Zealand, where I immigrated to 32 years ago, and took up the role here at the University of Auckland, initially effectively just to manage the intellectual property of the university. But I'll probably flick into my presentation now. So that's my background. And then can I share my screen? Is that possible?
Sure. Let me do that.
Just give me, yeah.
Let me go ahead. It's all yours.
Okay, thanks. I'll just do this quickly. So really here we go, sharing screen. Okay. So if I share my screen, let me just do this one here. Share. So can you still all see that?
Sure.
So just if I've ever go back, say 20 years ago, if you think about if you think about industry at the turn of the, let's say at the turn of the century in the late 1990s, large industry, global industry, or typically had what I would describe as fully integrated research and development capability, in that they did quite a lot of their own research. They had big R&D departments. And then a couple of things happened. The first was that companies worked out they couldn't hire all the smartest people. And so, it started a lot in the pharmaceutical industry with the development of the biotechnology industry, insofar as companies started to purchase biotechnology companies and have them alongside their own R&D. But it also then broadened out into, say, bigger industries, so Procter & Gamble. And it was started really by the kind of concept of open innovation and the idea that you can't control or have all of your own smartest people. And even if you do have big R&D departments, you're not immune to what I would describe as a Kodak moment, insofar as, or a Xerox moment. And so that sort of led to innovation. And we as a university at that point in time had quite a big business literally selling research. So a company would turn up and say, I want to buy 15 professors, 15 people doing this, and they just went on and did that. They still took the results and put those into their vertically integrated R&D system and developed their own products. Similarly, we had bits of intellectual property, and we could sell those bits of intellectual property in return for royalties. Now, a couple of things then happened around about, during the GFC. The first thing that happened in the GFC is everybody stopped spending on R&D just to survive, right? And so they let those things go. And the second thing that happened was innovation just got so fast, you just couldn't keep up with your own corporate environment to what might be coming out. And the third thing that happened is products generally got much, much more complex. So for example, if you were a university and you developed 3 or 4 patent families and you're quite strong in something, you could go to a product. So for example, a phone in 2019 or 2009 or 2008 had about, I don't know, 100 patent families in it. It now has 2,000 or 5,000, right? And so your ability to leverage any kind of revenue from a single family of patents becomes impossible, with perhaps the exception of pharmaceuticals. So what then happened was, with that contraction of corporate R&D, what filled that gap, because gaps get filled, was startup ecosystems. And companies, rather than thinking about what they just actually now, and to a point now where we discovered when we formed a company and we sold it to Apple, we were in the conversations with them. This was around about 2015, 2016. And we just said, just out of interest, how many of these companies like this do you buy a year? And they said, well, we'll do a transaction like this. And it was hundreds of millions of dollars 3 times a week. Right. And so it became obvious that if you wanted to be an industry that, or a university that was connected to its community, particularly its business community, both locally and globally, you better have a healthy startup ecosystem. And one of the things that I would observe across other universities, and the thing we've been able to do here, is there's still quite a disconnect between the sort of, or an opportunity missed, right? And that is that in business schools, they teach entrepreneurship and you run a lot of programs around student startups, and that's absolutely fantastic. What gets missed is the piece in between, then linking that to the research intensive piece. And one of the things you want to try and do is join those two things together a bit. And so universities are in existential crises, right? Our funders expect more impact from us locally. If they're going to continue to fund us, students expect more, companies expect more, governments expect more. So we've got to respond to that. And so what we then did was looked around the world at those kind of places where, you know, they'd been successful. And you can go and look at some of the traditional ones. You can go to Silicon Valley, but that's got its unique characteristics. You can go to Waterloo in Canada, and they've got the unique characteristics. We sort of looked a little bit beyond that and sort of looked at places like Pittsburgh in the US, which in the late 1990s, where as their industries collapsed, you know, they were losing 30,000 jobs a year, a week, right? As in terms of their ability. And so they really recreated their city out of 2 universities and building a creative entrepreneurial ecosystem around the University of Pennsylvania and Carnegie Mellon, where they had 2 areas of necessarily completely competitive advantage, but comparative advantage in robotics and in healthcare. And they built their kind of new ecosystem around that. And what you see in those kind of healthy startup ecosystems is these kind of highly scalable curricular and extracurricular platforms that are kind of campus wide, and if they fully leverage the links to the business school. So I don't want to be prejudicial on it, so I'll say things with a little bit of a, you know, tongue in cheek, but sometimes universities, the business school tends to think of itself quite sort of unique. I think using your entrepreneurial education platforms, the business school should become much more of a university resource than perhaps just the business school. So some of the courses you run, you know, think about, you don't have to enroll in the business school to do those, but you can create curricular and extracurricular things that go beyond that through to the humanities, engineering, and so on and so forth. You've got to provide better incentives for inventors and founders, and so that's staff members who are teaching. And so one of the big challenges is that, at least is this idea that the only thing that matters is publications, and that doing sort of things like working with industry or having a patent is seen as secondary. The other thing is that you tend not to there are within departments, there are some people who are very good at teaching. There's some people are very good at research. Some people are very good at running the department, so HODs. Sometimes there's no real differentiation for people who just happen to be good at that kind of knowledge translation. The other thing too that's really important is if you can find any sort of money at all that provides that kind of get-going money, literally, and it can be anything from $5,000 to $10,000 to kind of provide just that next experiment or that next market validation or that next just something that enables that, whether it's the time or a resource or something that just enables you to do that. The other thing is, you know, everywhere has investors and incubators. I think as a university, one of the things that we do have is, again, I'll talk to it in my coming up, is, you know, universities produce amazing talent, and you can develop those strong relationships with other investors simply by saying, you know, opening your doors and saying, investors, you should come and see these people because they might be your next hire. And if you've got incubators, developing strong relationships with those. And then also, as long as you've already got that kind of strong connectivity with local businesses, and what I'm really encouraged about is you're all already doing part of that, you know, driving of the student entrepreneurship. And I think one of the key things that you can change on campus, and I've covered this a little bit, is you can change a university much more effectively from the bottom up than you can from the top down. So one of the things that you're looking at is a number of your students, as they, even the ones that do PhDs, you know, they are starting to realize that there is more to perhaps a career in academia than simply publishing papers. So the way I kind of look at this, or the way we sort of look at this here at Auckland is, sorry, just let me put it up like that, is this kind of concept of you know, that what I call the transfer of information from a university through to the community, and then the impact that that has. And the pyramid is actually the kind of numbers involved, and they're all sort of interlinked. So if you look at the traditional bottom of the university, what's the, and I'll just tell a sort of apocryphal story. People say, oh, I went to a meeting with a number of industry leaders here in New Zealand, and they would say to me, there's all this intellectual property, there's all this research that sits on the shelf. It never gets used. It's sitting there gathering dust. And so I just asked the question. I said, well, that's interesting. I don't agree that that's true, because I said most knowledge from a university or intellectual property leaves the buildings here in people's heads. And I asked the question, I said, how many of you have hired a postgraduate student or a PhD in your highly technical business last year? And a load of hands went up, and they said, yeah, we've done loads. And I said, well, how many of you have actually sat down with those people and asked them two questions? One is, what did you do your PhD in? And secondly, who was your professor who supervised you, and what are they good at, right? And nobody showed their hands. And so I cheekily said, well, then the problem of the gathering dust isn't on our shelves, it's on yours, right? And so again, it was kind of like just a sort of challenge there. But I think it's true, and I think the universities have got some explaining to do around how this knowledge pyramid works. So at the bottom, of course, you've got graduates and postgraduates. They leave with intellectual property in their heads. We publish papers. Those papers do get read by industry that wants to understand those. But then if you do that well, and you've got in your things, then those companies often come and want to buy research from you. They also want to buy consultancy licenses and business units. And then at the very top, as I've described, that sort of startup ecosystem, they also want to invest in and buy our startup companies or spin out companies. And the challenge for a university, so for every one of 10 of those top, there's 100,000 at the bottom. That's the kind of scale. And the hypothesis that we're running here is that entrepreneurship will square that triangle. Right. And if you can square that triangle, what you're going to create is a much more vibrant, innovative, connected university ecosystem that's going to be beneficial for all in the community. Right. So that's the hypothesis we're running. So the way in which we do this here is we've taken an approach that says, what does a good business need? Well, a good business needs it needs a thing, So a product, in this case, an intellectual property or the product. It needs capital, and it needs human capital. And so what we've tried to do is join up on campus those three different things. And what we do here, this is a funnel. So for those of you, so that's why it's spiraling down. And what the goal at the bottom is to have, so we're very fortunate here, and you can do this any other way. You have wealthy alumni, but we have a small, what we call a get-going, a pre-seed fund, which we use that. And the idea behind it is that we have companies that leave the campus that are well run and well financed with some kind of finance. And whether that's a spin-out company that's derived from research on the left-hand side, or whether it's a startup company, a dorm student startup company on the right-hand side, we just want them to be well run. And so we run this kind of thing. Now, the challenge of this funnel is, and this is where the role of the business school and education, you're moving from an education process where there are no winners and losers, right? In other words, you're coming to learn. There's nobody who gets turned away, right? To a process by which it starts to filter out, and it becomes self-evident there are some ideas that just will not be businesses. And so the concept of providing safe exits, but also providing an environment at the top of the funnel that is completely open, and no idea is a bad idea. And the way in which we do that is, so our role, so UniServices, we are investors, so we have to be a filter. We have to be harsh, because the challenge here is, if you're too open at the top of the funnel and you're an investor, you lose money. But if you're too closed at the top of the funnel dries up really quickly, because people say, oh, I'm never going to go and see them again because they didn't like my idea. All right. So the way we do it is we have a kind of emergence. So we're blue, and the Center of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the business school is orange. And what we do is we use very much, it's a kind of 90% thing. So somebody turns up at our thing and says, I've invented a perpetual motion machine, right? We don't say, what are you, that's mad. What are you smoking? We say, how about you go to some of these courses at the business school, and there's these programs, some are curricular, some of them are extracurricular, and they go through things like this. So there's a market validation, there's a how do you a business plan competition. I'll come to the whole bunch of other things in a minute, but those things, and it becomes self-evident to them that they're either not good ideas or good ideas, and nobody's upset by those. Even if people who enter the business plan competition don't win the business plan competition, they don't go, oh, I'm never entering again. So you've kept this funnel very open at the top. Then what happens as you go down this process, you start to filter out things that have huge potential and they're hugely good ideas, and then we can start doing the investment process here. And so we've got some government funding that helps us leverage the funding that we do. And so this is why this goes from thick orange to thick blue at the bottom. And so we've managed to keep a process whereby we have a very open funnel, but we're disciplined in kind of getting down to the filtering. And the safe exits we described of coming out of this funnel are on the right-hand side. If you're a student and you doesn't work, you can go and get a job. But you'll probably be a better employee because you've had this, whether you're an engineer and you've been through this process, you'll get a better job because you'll be a better employee. On the left-hand side, the safe exits for something academic is, we'll go and do some more research or go and get a grant, and there are other places for those things. So creating an environment of that moves from education to practice in a safe environment. And that's the lovely thing, why I'm passionate about doing that at these universities. You could never do this anywhere else. The universities have a unique characteristic of tertiary education institutes where you can do this. So that's the kind of things that, so I can just talk a little bit about some of the programs that get done here. So, we have a summer lab over the summer vacation. There's a doctoral entrepreneurial leadership program. The other thing is, the really nice thing about this area, innovation and entrepreneurship, is it's quite an attractive proposition or story for any of your alumni that have made lots of money, because they can have huge impact with their donations. So I talked a little bit about the Vanguard program. That was a gift. And what that enables is 20 students a year get taken to Silicon Valley. They get taken to all of the, number of VCs there. They get taken to the, sorry, I just need to stop my thing going. But they get taken to Silicon Valley. Just doing it. They get taken to Silicon Valley, and they're exposed to the Y Combinator incubators, and they get to just do all that sort of thing. So there's innovative mindset, and some of this stuff is just creating a mindset as well. So, and I think the important thing is these are programs that go across the university. So a number of these things here will be delivered to engineering students. They'll be delivered to the medical faculty, the science faculty, and so on and so forth. So it's not just the business school, so it's going broader. So those are the kinds of things that that we've put together. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about on this one. Is please feel free to ask any questions or comments. I'm happy to hear them as you go forward. But those are the kinds of things that we've started to look at. One of the other things that we've also done here is that, or learnt, is that again in the sort of 1990s and early 2000s, even today, sometimes universities think that the intellectual property that they are going to, or that gets developed at their university, has huge value, and that they should try and hold on to intellectual property and leverage it into new revenue sources. Well, our observation would be that this activity is never going to be a money spinner for the university. You want things to cover their costs, but it's never going to be a money spinner. And why I know that is because we sold a company for multiple hundreds of millions of dollars, low hundreds of million dollars. And I took the check to the clock tower, which is the university's administration center. And the finance officer said, "Thank you very much for the check, but that keeps the lights on for 2 weeks." So because this is a big university, the total cost, operational budget, it was on the margin, right? So the money side of this is on the margin. So you shouldn't make the mistake that commercialization engagement is a money spin of the university. It should, of course, pay for itself, but it's not the primary objective. The primary objective is about again, community engagement, student experience, all of those other things that are much more valuable. So if you make that leap of faith, then how you manage intellectual property, you can actually do it from the perspective of using the value of that to incentivize the people. So let your staff have much more, have the majority of any kind of revenue that you might make from intellectual property. So we only asked to cover some of our costs. So it's between 5 to 10% of the founding equity of a company. So there's those kinds of things that you can think about, but think about it rather than being a money. So don't try to overvalue your intellectual property, and use it to incentivize your staff. The other thing is, if you going back to the I&E piece, and being a broader resource across campus, is that and this is across the whole gamut of research and teaching, is 19 out of 20 postgraduate students will not have careers in academia, right? And yet the only thing they're taught while they're doing their PhD is how to be a professor. And I heard an anecdote, and I don't know how true it is, but the chances of you becoming a professor are actually lower than you working in a startup and having an exit, right? So universities almost have a duty of care to provide postgraduate students with other bits now, along their journey. And if you're running these programs anyway, you're doing that for other reasons, then encouraging them to participate and considering this idea of an industry PhD or a 21st century postgraduate student is, I think, one of the ways that you can drive a lot of change. The other thing that does for you as well, if your job on campus is to create successful companies, is that there's always this tension between, well, a professor might need to leave their job to do things. My counsel would be, don't make the professor try and be the startup company CEO. Let them stay in the university. But as I say, 19 out of 20 of their PhD students aren't going to have careers in academia. They're the people who leave with the idea and create the business. Right. So if I looked at all of our successful deep tech businesses, they've all been where the professors stayed at the university, and it's their students that have gone out with whatever they've done in the PhD and created their large spin-out companies. The final thing I would say from a national perspective in terms of building ecosystems is that universities compete for students. You should compete for students. You should compete on those teaching, because that makes you get better. You may even compete for research funding in various different ways. You know, it's sort of like what I call co-opetition. You know, sometimes you have to collaborate to get the money, sometimes you don't, and so on and so forth. But at this end of town, you don't have to, you're not competing. The idea that one of your, you know, the chances of each of your universities having a competing business that comes out of these things in a kind of deep tech never happens. So there's a huge value in collaboration in this space. And so if you've got, and not reinventing the wheel and building on scale where you have it. So, you know, and this is, so, you know, we're relatively fortunate in New Zealand. So one of the things that we've done if I go back to this slide here, on the left-hand side of this piece, is that the smaller universities have clubbed together to build scale, right? So they run all of these kinds of programs as a single entity, and they all contribute to it. So they're not all trying to hire the same people. They're not all they all just agree to lump it together. And we, as the biggest university in New Zealand, we have already built that scale. But what we can then do, because we've got scale, we can build specialization. So we, you know, our expertise, they can go and talk about the process of commercialization and the advice you give and all that sort of stuff. We can then go in, well, if you're a biotech business or a food business, we can bring you access to some of the world's best pharmaceutical brains, some of the best food brains, and so on and so forth. So you're building that together. And so we can even do it. We've even done it on a kind of trans-Tasman basis. You know, obviously it's easier now because you don't have to travel as much, but sharing resources. So don't compete about those. And then and then what you can then do is, if you all collectively go as a group of universities, and again, each one of you is slightly different, but you can go both to, you know, donors, you can go to government funders, and you can say, look, you know, and we've done it here where you go, look, we're working together with a group of Australian universities. The Australian government is putting a little bit of money in. Would you match what they're putting in? And you could do, you know, you might be able to go and say, so it's not costing you, Australia, everything. You're sharing the costs across different countries. And so you can start to build those if you get collaborative things, whether that's on the courses side, on the training side, on the management of some kind of pre-seed fund, whether it's sharing costs of incubators, and so on and so forth. So that's and then the other one is, you know, often in this space, when we talk about how you go to perhaps people who want to do this, is everybody wants to try and put money in at the bottom of the fund here, and they should, but that's the market. You know, the market, this is where the market operates. Where there is a true market failure, this stuff here, nobody funds at all. It's either done from anything that the university's got left over, or it's philanthropy. And my challenge to people who fund universities or want to continue to see them being successful is this kind of concept that this area here isn't funded, but the impact of a few small dollars in this area here becomes hugely impactful. So that's kind of the way we think of the world. I hope that's been helpful. Obviously want to just carry on answering questions if you've got them. So, and again, thank you for listening to me. I do feel imposter syndrome, especially as you've described all the great things you're doing in Latin America. You're on mute, Renee. On mute.
Yes, thank you, thank you. No, thank you very much for this wonderful introduction to the topic. And now let's open the floor for comments, questions. The idea here is to collaborate, as he mentioned it, and particularly when we have smaller universities than what we have in the University of Auckland. Maybe that collaboration is probably more important in our region than, let's say, in other places. That's my feeling, but I may be wrong. Okay, this is just my comment. But go ahead, Marco.
Yeah, I had a question for Dr. Will. You spoke a lot about how you put a special interest into the particular context, and you mentioned the case of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University and everything that's going on around there, and how they used it to be able to build something. But there's one thing that I wanted to ask, and I was looking into Auckland University, and I see that you also build around culture in a different sense as well, with these courses called, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, Why Papa Tamatarao?
Yeah, okay.
WTR courses.
Yeah. So look, and that is a really important point, and actually one that thinks so.
Will, can you are not sharing the screen, right?
So I'll come off sharing the screen. Yeah, apologies for that.
Yeah.
How do I do that? Share. Wait a minute. Here we go. Unstop sharing. Sorry, I just need to. Here we go. Stop sharing. Can you do that for me? I'm not sure I'm at this point able to. Oh, here we go. Stop share. Got it. Sorry,
yeah,
apologies for that. Yeah,
that's okay.
Sorry. Yeah, look, I think that's a really important point, and what that's done in terms of culture. New Zealand is we have a bicultural. The native peoples here are New Zealand Maori, and one of the things that's enriching the culture here is the one of the sort of concept of Maori entrepreneurship, and one of the things is that it's only in the last 30 years that, so for example, Maori were very badly treated in New Zealand, even though they had a treaty. So and it's in the last 30 years since there's been a number of settlements and things, is that a couple of observations you'd make in New Zealand is that Maori make up the vast majority of the younger population now. They're almost nearly 50% of, in terms of the younger people. They're going to be about 20% of the thing. And there's a huge emerging Maori economy. And what we're utilizing here in some of the ways in which we think about entrepreneurship is the Te Ao Māori worldview. So what we're trying to kind of avoid necessarily, and that's why it's very difficult to go to say, take Silicon Valley and replicate it, or take Israel and replicate it, right? Because particularly that, and you can kind of replicate a little bit, but even in your, let's call it colonial or Western approach, doesn't work with your with Indigenous people or First Nations. However, the First Nations people have got a lot to add in terms of entrepreneurship and the way of doing things, particularly in the way in which benefits are shared, the way in which businesses are structured, all that kind of stuff. And so that journey is also around building both pathways for Indigenous entrepreneurship, but at the same time also using that Te Ao Māori worldview to improve your overall global approach to entrepreneurship and innovation. Does that answer your question, Marco?
Yeah, very much so, because I just kept thinking, and reflecting on how important it was to be able to not just adapt something directly, but put it into context before you try to adapt. Because otherwise, you're subjecting an idea to constraints that are not in the environment where that idea originally developed. And I think that's something that's very important to do in Central America, because here our culture and our socioeconomic reality is very different to other places in the world. And we need to translate first that into our context before we can see ideas explode.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I've recently come back. I grew up in East Africa. They have a whole bunch of different issues in Kenya and Tanzania. But one of the things I would say is that the New Zealand context is one that perhaps our entrepreneurs and our students don't have a little bit of an observation. It's comfy here, right? It's comfortable. Life is relatively easy. There's all that bit. In your context, it's much harder, and actually that can sometimes be leveraged into a good thing. The fact that entrepreneurialism is actually a way of survival, not a way of life.
Mhm.
So that's a bit different.
Who would like to go next?
If I may ask, Will, just specifically, do you bring in quote unquote real world entrepreneurs into these spaces you create for student involvement? That it's like entrepreneurs in residence, that kind of thing. And
we do. We do. We have in any number of different ways. So you do it through alumni. I've talked about one of the ways we do it here is because we have a fund, I have to have an investment committee. And the way I use the investment committee is, I talked about that specialization, is when we're making an investment, we don't make it without somebody who's either been in a company or worked in a large company or been an investor in those. So we have these investment committees, and around those tables. So for my biotech and pharmaceutical investment committee has 3 people on it who've 2 of them have started and sold 2 companies each. And so that's an example. We have other investors who sit around the table, and one of the ways in which you can approach, not necessarily, philanthropy comes in different forms, right? So sometimes if you're talking to some of your alumni, it's not about money, it's about can you give of your time. So bringing those kinds of people in is really important. So the answer is we do. And our business plan competition runs on volunteers who want to get involved. Part of it because it's fun, right? These are energetic, smart kids. You want to be around them. It keeps you young. It's just a fun environment. And so, it's absolutely important that there are people they can look up to, people they can talk to. And the way in which we also think about it is the concept of entrepreneurs in residence, but also in some of the courses, what we say to some of the people, they'll say, we'll ask them who they think is the most important person in their business. And they'll say, well, it's the CEO or it's the CFO or it's the whatever. And actually we say, no, it's the most important person that you can persuade is somebody who's got a 30-year reputation. Nobody wants to lose their reputation. If you can persuade that person to put their name on your company's letterhead as a director, you've persuaded somebody that what you're doing is good. And that's kind of like as hard as persuading somebody to give them their money. And so, again, just being able to think about not just providing an entrepreneur in residence, but what do you say to an entrepreneur in residence that makes it real?
Got it. Thank you.
I maybe add a few points from a New Zealand perspective.
Sure.
So thank you first, Will, for sharing that really impressive presentation. I think Marco asked about the context, and I believe ecosystems, I think Will had a very strong argument that the place matters, and I agree with that. So the university is like a marketplace, and these stories and aspirations that you show others it can be done from New Zealand, you can create a global company, that is important. But I believe for New Zealand, we also have a difficult playbook because we are so isolated. So many of these tech startups, they have to build relationships with markets such as the United States very early. And some resources might not come from New Zealand. They maybe get funding from the United States. So what does it mean? I think it's also these linkages across ecosystems. And think about the connections, the people-to-people connections. So what I often see is that students who maybe had 6 months overseas in Asia and come back to New Zealand, they have a very different mindset, how they think about growing a company, leveraging ecosystems. So that knowledge spillover that happens better within a place can also happen to some degree across ecosystems. So I think for your region, what is important is to really facilitate strong links overseas. That would be my analysis based on my research. Thank you. That was just that I wanted to add. And maybe one more point. There's also increasingly ecosystems that are on a digital space. So there are certain, like the founders layer or deal room, where they're really like global ecosystems in the digital space. And they can give knowledge and resources to entrepreneurs. They also have sometimes links to universities. It's not the same than to have it within that marketplace of a university, but it can complement some deficiencies that you maybe have in the local ecosystem.
What about Alejandra?
Thank you, Renee, and thank you for the great presentation, Will. I love the knowledge transfer pyramid, and I think some of the best practices Will mentioned are also like to build an entrepreneurial culture on campus and create interdisciplinary programs where students from different faculties collaborate on different entrepreneurial projects. And that can be accomplished like by creating programs and competitions as the ones we saw to encourage graduate and undergraduate students to propose innovative solutions to local challenges, and also by establishing like student-led innovation hubs or clubs to promote peer-driven initiatives. As Will was mentioning, it's important to consider changing academic staff incentives and redefining the traditional model to equally reward like industry engagement, consulting projects, or startup mentorships. It's important to incentivize startups' participation by offering seed funding, grants, or equity-free capital to students and staff interested in developing like startups. It's also important to collaborate like with other research organizations, for example, by sharing resources such as labs, like incubators and mentorship networks, and fostering collective growth and foster its impact through dissemination, partnerships, and open innovation. I also consider like relevant, like the pre-market education by developing like entrepreneurship awareness programs, and also like to broaden like the engagement channels with industry, for example, via internships, sponsored research, consultancy services, and workforce development. I love, for example, when Will mentioned like it's about also opening the doors and saying like to investors, come and see what these people are doing and get to know like about their projects. And it's about that. That's how great ideas comes to life.
Fantastic. Any other comments, suggestion?
I have a question. Sorry, go on, Marco.
No, I wanted to hear your perspective on something. It might be like a sort of a controversial question, especially the context in which you all work. But I want to know, like, the University of Auckland is very well regarded, well placed in the world rankings. But how influential would you say that rankings are in being able to put these ideas forward and move these things forward? Does it ranking come first or ranking come after you do these things? Is it a result of these initiatives, or is it something that builds these?
Nobody wants, like, here's the thing, right? So nobody wants to be a slave to rankings. My own personal view is I think rankings, some of the ranking systems drive a couple of things. They're very Anglo-centric. They're very, a lot of them are drive the sort of behavior that you don't actually want with respect to a number of different things that, you know, the market is a much harder. Here's the thing: is the market is a much harder master than peer review. Okay, and you're starting to see that. And so my view is that if you want to be there are very few universities just in my view, in for 100 years' time, if they just consider to think of themselves as being places where stuff is just pushed out, that they're going to cease to exist. And I think the rankings will have to change to reflect that. And I think there's another opportunity here is that again, New Zealand comes from that Anglo-centric world, but we're increasingly moving towards being a Pacific nation rather than necessarily an Anglo-centric one. And that changes the way you think. The other thing is again, are rankings important for you in Latin America, or is your, what's more important? Your global connectivity is important, but what you do for your local community is always going to be more important than that. And so I think, putting those things into context. The other thing is I would say is that, the world in the 20th century and the world in the 21st century are going to be very different. They already are. Legacies, there's a lot of things, and coming from Africa, for example, they never had a copper network in Kenya for phones. And so a hell of a lot of innovation around the mobile phone, particularly as it for example, M-Pesa was the first global money transfer system that was done on SMS, and that revolutionized the way people operate. It created an entire microfinancing entrepreneurship through microfinancing. There's a whole different things that can happen with Web3 that legacy places are going to be slow to adopt, right? That the opportunities that, because you don't come from a legacy system, enable you to do. So that's my view on it. It's a funny answer on things, but of course rankings, your university wants to have good rankings because until such time as people think they're not important, they still are. But you don't do it for being a slave to rankings.
That's interesting. Yes, she mentioned, I know, Antje, that you probably have to leave soon, right? Okay, no, that's perfectly okay. And we are going to be about to close, but feel free. I know that you had a sharp appointment or something like that around 9:30 your time. Is that correct?
I have to leave in 2 minutes, but thank you so much.
Great. No, but thank you very much, Antje, for your participation. This has been really great to have you over. She is one of our advisors, in our EmpreSomos advisors, you see. And so she's always telling me what to do and how to do things, you see. So I always appreciate, her advice. All the way
Antje, we should have a coffee.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate to be part of this today and enjoyed the conversation. All the best. Thank you.
Thanks to you. And I'm going to close. But then I'm going to have like a sort of kind of informal talk with you in a moment, okay? But thank you, Antje.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. Okay, let me say thank you to everyone. We would like to take a moment to extend our wholehearted appreciation to all the participants and, of course, our audience as well. A special thank to Will Charles, Director of Investment at the UniServices of University of Auckland, for sharing his invaluable experience in managing entrepreneurial ecosystems. The strategies and lessons discussed today are indeed inspirational, okay, for us and for Central America and beyond. Now, we would like to extend our gratitude to our exceptional panelists whose insights and expertise enriched our webcast. So thank you, Dr. Arturo Condo, President of the University. Thank you very much, Professor Alejandra Alquijay, Dean of Admissions and Partnerships, Universidad del Valle. Thank you, Dr. Canales, Dr. Marco Tulio Canales, Dean of the Engineering Faculty at Universidad Tecnológica Centroamericana de Honduras. And of course, thank you to Antje Fiedler. And the work of you all serve as also as an inspiration for the rest of all the people in Central America, but also the world. We want to thank you also to our audience, and I would like to remind you to visit and subscribe to our EmpreSomos YouTube channel to find these and other similar virtual events. We look forward to future conversations and initiatives to continue building on the topic of entrepreneurial ecosystems. Okay? Thank you very much, everyone.